permission granted for AI note takers or any additional recordings. And then if you would like a copy of the recording, you can just contact the COSCHEM office. And then I would like to pass over to Aisha, who is our chairperson for the lecture committee, and who will then pass over to our lovely guests for their presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, let me see. All right. Okay, so good morning and welcome everybody to our morning talk. As Bridget mentioned, I'm Aisha and I'm the chairperson of the COSCHEM lecture committee. And I'm excited to introduce our two guests today, Susan and Sivishnie, who's going to give us an introduction and speak to us about how global disruption affects the cosmetic supply chain and what we can do about it. So just as Richard mentioned, no AI note takers. Let's keep questions to the end and please utilize the chat as well if you have questions through the presentation that you would like to have answered. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Susan and Sivishnie, and excited for your talk.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you for having us, and thank you to everyone for joining today. First, a big shout out to all the women, because it's Women's Month. Yeah, we appreciate the impact you make on our businesses, your businesses, the industry and communities every single day. I'd also like to thank COSCHEM for inviting me back and Rohlig back. It's a pleasure to share insights with your members and be part of these valuable discussions. For those who haven't met me before, I'm Susan. I'm on the business development side at Rohlig-Grindrod. I've been with the company just short of 8 years in new business in particular, and this is Sivishnie Moodley. She's our national forwarding product manager and probably the most knowledgeable person I know in terms of global shipping trends. Today's topic is particularly relevant given the ongoing disruptions affecting global supply chains. To give you a broader perspective on what's happening in the market and what it means for importers, and particularly importers from the cosmetic industry, I'll hand over to Sivishnie shortly. She'll share some valuable insights into the current global shipping landscape and key developments that could impact your supply chains. But then just a quick side note that this is predominantly focused on a sea freight perspective, but Rohlig-Grindrod is a multimodal logistics provider. So we do air freight, sea freight, road freight, warehousing, the works, whatever you need. Good job. Let's hand over to Sivishnie. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for that. Just an introduction into myself. I'm Sivishnie Moodley. I'm the National Product and Forwarding Manager for Rohlig-Grindrod. It's an absolute pleasure to present to you today. And I just also would like to thank COSCHEM for giving us this opportunity and each and every one of you for joining in. I believe that this is an extremely important discussion because, you know, global disruptions within the supply chain affect all of us one way or the other. So thank you for that. Now the lunch I cooked for Lord Philip.
So we're going to share our presentation now.
Perfect. Yeah, sharing. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. We can see next slide.
Okay, just to briefly take you through the global market overview. As you would know, scheduled reliability remains under tremendous pressure because we're seeing vessel delays, blank sailings, port congestion, and weather disruptions will continue to impact transit time predictability. In terms of the port and inland congestion, the port and inland congestion continue to persist across Africa, Asia, parts of Europe, with trucking, rail, and cargo evacuation constraints increasingly causing delays. As you would know, the Durban port has been a mess in the last few weeks or months. And that's also had an impact, you know, with the rest of the ports around the world. Weather-related disruptions, we've seen typhoon activity in North Asia, the monsoons in India, and then seasonal rains impacting West African logistics. Strong winds also disrupting the South African port operations, low weather levels affecting Europe, and extreme heat waves across the Middle East and Europe. So trade continues to flow. However, global trade remains resilient, with carriers continuing to adjust networks and routing strategies to maintain cargo flow disruptions despite disruptions. So what does it mean for us? Plan early, remain flexible, stay informed. Building additional lead times into the supply chain, secure bookings early, and remain flexible on routing and schedule as market volatility and operational disruptions continue across key trade lanes. So the South African ports, strong citrus export demand is tightening reefer capacity and terminal resources, while dangerous goods cargo continues to face operational constraints. So early bookings is key and proactive planning remain critical to securing equipment and vessel space. So as you would know, the Durban port, we've seen an average of 22 vessels sitting out at anchorage with an average of 131 hours waiting time. And at some stages, it even attributed to 68 hours at berth. DCT Pier 1, 3 to 4 days waiting time. Pier 2, it's between 5 to 9 days. In some cases, we're seeing 12 days waiting time. So the Durban port has been a huge point of contention in terms of what's really happening in the Durban port. I mean, we've seen at one point the terminal, they purchased new straddle carriers and everybody was hopeful. However, we're now experiencing some of the other equipment that's breaking down, some of the other straddle carriers that needs maintenance or is just not working. And that's having an impact on the port. We've also experienced a nervous system where truckers are waiting in long queues to uplift containers from the terminal. In addition to that, the vessels berthing into the Durban terminal, you see vessels sitting out at anchorage. So all of these factors have a huge impact on what's going on at the terminal. There are contingency plans and Transnet have announced contingency plans in terms of a new system that they have gone on to, which is called ICTSI. It's a new portal, a new tool, that they've launched where you can go on and track your shipments. You can go on and trace where the cargo, when vessels are coming in, and so forth. They've also completed the implementation of the NAVIS N4 system. However, there is also a major backlog, and that would take some time to clear out.
Just want to jump in quickly. So this is all system generated upgrades, but what about the actual working capacity of the port? So that's where the congestion sits.
Yes.
And it's really out of any agent's control.
No. So Susan, in terms of that, I think that would be a long-term goal. When Transnet did purchase a whole lot of straddle carriers, like I said, everybody was hopeful, problem solved. And to be honest, the port did operate. The productivity levels did increase. However, there's other equipment that's breaking down, other equipment that needs maintenance, that's having an impact on the actual operations within the port. All right. And as a result, you're seeing a lot of vessels sitting out at anchorage, or the carriers would rather berth at another terminal as opposed to the Durban gateway terminal.
And just for anyone online to understand, from a demurrage and detention perspective, that only happens once the containers are off the vessel or while they're sitting out at sea.
So that would come into effect when the vessels are at port.
But then we can't get in with the trucks, so then it starts incurring.
So there's been, I mean, as you know, we are part of a lot of other freight forwarders as well, are part of the South African Freight Forwarders Association. And these factors are continuously being addressed, highlighted, because it does have an impact on the importers. It does have an impact, daily in terms of planning. And you cannot get your cargo out of the port. There's a lot of customers that have line stoppages that need cargo urgently,
and they just have to wait.
So these are things that are being addressed as well with the carriers. However, it comes down to, we're also dealing with a third party organization, which is, Transit has partnered with the Philippines. So it's not discussions that can happen overnight. It's long term. In the meantime, Durban Port is really a huge problem. We're hoping that the contingency plans in terms of recovery will help with evacuating those containers from the port, and customers can get their cargo quicker than expected.
And then obviously to highlight there with Cape Town and Port Elizabeth, if we can get cargo pulled off at those ports, any agent would be able to do that, and then truck down to.
Yes, they can. I mean, but that's
an option for urgency.
Yes, but that obviously comes at a cost as well.
Yes.
If you're taking it out of Kock, for instance, and you want the cargo in Durban, if you've got a customer in Durban, there's the transport cost that you need to consider. So it's all of those factors. So Cape Town and Port Elizabeth, I mean, with Cape Town, it's always, weather that has a huge impact. However, you're seeing a 3-day waiting period in Cape Town, and Port Elizabeth the same. It's mostly the weather that has a huge impact in Port Elizabeth. However, we've seen a huge demand in Port Elizabeth as a result of what's happening in Durban, and a lot of customers are wanting to take off their cargo in Port Elizabeth, and that's also creating now a congestion in peak. So as much as the port is operational and productivity levels are high in Port Elizabeth, by rerouting cargo to Port Elizabeth, you would see that congestion eventually. So, thank you. So moving over to the Far East, and if you've got any cargo that's coming from the Far East supply chain continue to face pressure from the typhoon disruptions, transshipment congestion, vessel schedule instability, a lot of geopolitical tension, peak season demands, and these demands have bottleneck. You'd see freight rates that have increased considerably. And the key impact is, yes, we've seen, I think it's been the third typhoon now that we've seen in the last month or so. And that's having a huge impact, especially with delays out of Shanghai and Ningbo. Port congestion and transshipment delays continue to persist. We've seen a lot of carriers transshipping, especially in Singapore. There's notices that went out. On average, some of the carriers are transshipping for 3 to 4 weeks, if not more. We've seen peak season demand. And as a result, that has also created a huge pressure. Freight rates remain volatile across key trade lanes. And shippers should allow additional lead times and monitor carrier updates. So supply chain shipping to and from the Far East continue to face disruptions. And as a result of all of the key factors that I've mentioned, my advice is that we need to plan better, have a forecast in terms of what you plan on shipping well in advance, and placing those bookings in advance so that you don't have a bottleneck closer to the time of when cargo is ready.
And I think also managing clients' expectations. So if that imported cargo is destined for another client, make sure that client understands the stresses that this routing does experience.
Absolutely. But I think also what's important, here as well, is that we often, pricing is paramount, and I know that everyone is looking at pricing, but routing is equally important. And if we don't look at the routing, and if that's not looked at carefully, you would have a carrier who will tell you, you know what, this is our routing, and then decide to change schedules. And it's very important that even if you're paying a little extra, that you know what your routing is, what your transit time is, and that you are managing that process. So in terms of carrier alliances, especially the Far East, you would have noticed end of May into June, July, we've seen that freight rates increase considerably. And one might ask why, in addition to the situation in the Middle East that has created, fuel prices to go up. We've also seen carriers change their alliance. So during COVID, a lot of carriers purchased or put in requisitions for new vessels. And a lot of those new vessels have now, is now ready. It's ready to market. And we've seen some of the carriers break away from each other. So initially, we had, carriers you would notice PRL, ONE, Evergreen, Hapag-Lloyd, Costco, GSL, and OOCL. They formed one consortium, and they slot chartered on vessels to Durban and Cape Town. And that consortium, because of additional vessels, decided to break away. And you would notice that PRL and Evergreen have now gone on their own, and they too have slot chartered onto their new vessels. So they're no longer part of the initial consortium into.
Just to explain the slot charter, so you just mean that on that vessel, the shipping line has their own allocated space, and then they go out and they fill those slots at whatever rate they want to sell at.
100%. Yeah, correct. Next slide. So we're going to move over to Europe. And Europe as well, we're seeing the supply chain, operationally continue to face pressure from port congestion, transport disruption. Most recently, we've seen in Germany, port strikes. There's a vessel schedule instability, congestion at gateway terminals, including Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, and selected UK ports. That affects the network fluidity. While critically low levels of the River Rhine, water levels are reducing the barge capacity and increasing independence on the rail and road transport. So these factors have a huge impact on logistics out of Europe. The heat wave and drought conditions across Europe also adds to the pressure. And those are just some of the key factors that's impacting the supply chain out of Europe. Here as well, we're encouraging shippers to allow for additional lead times and plan proactively well in advance. In Italy, there's the summer holidays, Italy's annual summer shutdown. That was between the 10th and the 23rd of August. And you would have seen...
Now.
Sorry?
That's now, yeah.
And you would have seen factories closing, suppliers, that would be closed. And that also would have caused some of the delays. So here again, customers are encouraged to plan well in advance, look at your forecast, and plan accordingly in terms of lead times.
And I think really understand that Europe is kind of like it's almost like a scale. So as one port tips the one way, then the other port tips the other way, and they all support each other, but they're all so close and not that big. So you feel that congestion at any given time.
And then we move over to the Indian subcontinent. If you've got cargo that's coming out of India in particular, the Indian region remains a key engine of global trade, supported by strong export activity and its strategic role in regional transshipment networks. However, Pressure on major shipping gateways, monsoon-related disruptions, and broader network constraints continue to impact the supply chain. Strong export demand. We've seen cargo out of India surge, and the region remains critical because it contributes to the manufacturing and sourcing supply chain. There's equipment imbalances, there's space constraints out of key gateways like Nhava Sheva and Mundra at the moment, and the seasonal monsoon that's happening. So just to go in a little deeper into India, what had happened is that when the Middle East crisis, the war happened, a lot of the carriers rerouted vessels, thinking that maybe they could reroute shipments into India and, use one of those ports as transshipment hubs. However, that has created a huge backlog. I mean, you have the likes of MSC, who brings in huge vessels, and the ports in India couldn't accommodate such huge vessels. And that has created a huge backlog within the supply chain. As a result, you've seen a lot of shipments getting rolled. There's space constraints out of India at the moment, and the entire supply chain has been disrupted. So there's huge capacity pressure, but despite ongoing operational constraints, regional trade activity remains resilient and strategic importance to the global commerce. Customers shipping to and from India, here again, you got to plan in advance. I think it's important here as well, not only to stick to certain key ports, look at ports where it's less congested. If you have a supplier that's shipping out of Nhava Sheva, Mundra, and there's a port that's closest to those ports, maybe look at the inland trucking. Possibly you could take it off from another port, which is a lot less congested, and the impact is not as bad, or the delays is not as bad.
And I think just to add to India quickly, didn't the Trump-China thing also affect? So a lot of people switched ordering now from India, then realized quality is great, so now they've stuck with it. So now we've also seen a bit of a volume demand.
Yeah. So it is a huge volume demand. I think
all at once. Yeah.
All at once. We've seen that demand during COVID, where India became, it surged, and then we've seen that demand now again.
Interesting.
Moving over to the Middle East, I think the Middle East, we all know, we've heard what's happening on the news, but the Middle East continues to face disruptions due to security concerns in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. For those of you who don't know, these are some of the key choke points in shipping, in the logistics, in global trade. Vessels rerouting, carrying network adjustments. We're seeing all kinds of things happening, and it's the Middle East remains fluid. Every single day, something is changing. You'll have a shipping line or a carrier telling you that they are routing cargo to the Middle East, and suddenly they will pull the service out purely because, there's been a vessel that's been bombed, or they're not going into that area because of security reasons. Like I said, it remains fluid on a daily basis. August also remains operational, but there's challenges with extreme temperatures, equipment performance, and reefer logistics. So just to also highlight, initially when the war happened in the Middle East, we ourselves had almost 34 containers stuck in the Gulf. And it was a challenge in terms of how do you get those containers out of the Gulf when you don't know? I mean, a lot of the carriers were not giving you enough information. They didn't know whether they were certain services into those routes. And then you had carriers like MSC announcing an end of voyage. And an end of voyage means that depending on where the vessel is taking shelter, they would discharge your cargo at that particular port. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And through a lot of learnings, we had to then figure out a way of moving that cargo inland on special equipment inland to those respective regions and to the end customer. So the Middle East is not an easy landscape. There's a lot of unknowns. Carriers, they sometimes would take shelter in certain, ports, and they don't have communication on the ground. The way the Middle East operates is unlike South Africa or the international ports. The Middle East operates, totally different. And there's sometimes where there's resources, they do not have enough resources. However, despite these key challenges, we've also seen a huge surge in inquiries in customers wanting to go into the Middle East for certain products. But it all depends on, planning, looking at routing, looking at what is available. But that landscape could change suddenly as well. So here as well, we need to look at what is the alternatives, and, plan accordingly. So the Strait of Hormuz, security concerns across the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea continue to create uncertainty in the Middle East. I'm being told that, for a long time, a lot of carriers didn't want to go by the Red Sea. But of recently, I know that, Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk are looking at maybe one or two of their vessels trialing, going through the Red Sea.
We're going to see insurance and all of that spark on that.
Yeah. So the only threat with going by the Red Sea is Yemen, and you can see it on my screen, and where Yemen is based, right at the tip of it, the Bab al-Mandeb Strip. There's the Houthi rebels that's based there, and that's always a risk because generally commercial vessels that go through the Red Sea, and they are ever so ready to attack. So that's always a threat. On my right, which is the Strait of Hormuz, on that side, for those of you who don't know, it is tanker vessels that go through that strait. And it is, at one point, the largest amount of crude oil was going via the Strait of Hormuz. And that's how important that strait is. And of course, I think everyone can remember the Suez Canal, the famous Ever Given that was stuck in the Suez Canal. And that's also an important choke point in
where they're still recovering from that.
Correct. Sure. So going back to recent attacks on commercial vessels and ongoing security concerns. So that's the concerns in terms of vessels being attacked. Just for information, we've had one of our shipments on board a vessel, and that vessel was attacked. And, there's a long process in terms of insurance and whether the cargo is still intact. And that could be drawn out for quite a while. And also, the carriers can then decide, depending on the extent of the damages, they can also declare general average on the vessel. So that's always also a possibility. So what happens when a shipment is in the Middle East and there's bombing and the vessel has to now go into a safe space? An example, if a carrier has to discharge at a certain port or contingency port, storage and demurrage, or most of demurrage, will start the day the container is offloaded. It's off the vessel.
And that is carried by the importer, or depending on the Incoterm, exporter,
Yes,
importer, yeah.
correct.
Not the
So-
shipping line.
Not the shipping line. So we have raised this concern numerous times with the carriers, and unfortunately, they've come back to say it has to be recovered from someone.
And it's a
And
global thing.
Because they don't have a mandate over that port, and they are just basically under shelter, they got to discharge it at a port, and that port needs to recover their costs.
Yeah.
So that's one way of them recovering that cost.
And in those cases, generally your insurance kicks into cover, but if you don't have insurance, then the general average becomes a concern.
Yes,
And
because
everyone
they
splits
can.
those fees, yeah.
So here as well, the Middle East, it's not an easy landscape, but having experienced in this landscape, there are some do's and don'ts, and of course the key factor here is, looking at your routing, looking at your transit times, and also inland. What are the inland options should something happen? How do we move the cargo inland, and what are the resources? So this is just an overview of Africa. I'm not going to go deep into this slide here. It is on the presentation. Africa as well, there's vessels delays. May result in routing delays and vessel changes. These delays have an impact on transit times. There's a lot of flood and road disruptions impacting inland transport, trucking shortages, congestion pressure at key ports, and into Africa. You have to know what is the landscape into Africa. We've seen where carriers take the cargo, and at certain points as well, cargo is sitting at transshipment ports. And if you do not know the landscape, and do not plan accordingly, that could be a costly.
Yeah, I think just to elaborate there is every country within Africa has pretty much their own rules and their own regulations. So you can't just cross from one into the other. It's got to be very well planned and very well executed. And then obviously to just be aware of each country's requirements. On top of all the flooding and the road disruptions and the drama and the African way.
Yeah. So I think that's Africa. And then we have the Indian Ocean Islands here as well. Increased vessel traffic impacting schedule reliability, long transit times, connecting delays, limited port congestion may worsen vessel delays. And planning is extremely important. With this routing. And I think we have to look at planning ahead and closely monitoring sailing schedules here as well. Okay, so I think before we move on to our question and answers, specifically to the cosmetic industry, I think there's key factors that also impact the cosmetic industry in terms of these disruptions that we see globally, which will include pricing, tariffs that's imposed from China, the United States, and how does this challenges impact you? Cosmetic industry, you rely on international networks for chemical ingredients or packaging, all of those things, and these disruptions causes a severe bottleneck for you. So from us, we would suggest, besides planning in advance, I think, at one point, importers, they imported just-in-time cargo. We're now going to look at just-in-case cargo because I think it is important that we do not rely on a single supply chain. We do not rely on a sole supplier. We always have a backup plan, and that would help you in your supply chain. You never know when that trade lane might be impacted. And it's important to have these backup plans. I mean, during COVID, we had a lot of customers that were importing from China where their sole supplier was in China. And if they couldn't get product out of China, they were pretty much stuck.
The whole business.
The whole
comes to
business
yeah.
comes to an halt. We've seen businesses going under liquidation as a result. So over the years, we've also helped customers try and diversify that supply chain. And even if you are looking at bringing smaller samples out of a different trade lane, you can trial that. But it's important to have a backup plan. It's important to have, just in case cargo. The other point that I would like to stress on is planning in advance and how critical is forecasting. I always encourage customers to provide a forecast, to provide a forward planning, because you never know what's going to happen in the supply chain and where the disruptions are going to cause an impact. We're seeing a lot of customers where there's line stoppages, there's urgent cargo, they cannot supply their customers, and planning in advance is important. In terms of pricing, yes, pricing is key. We're seeing, being in the South African market, we know that, with the economy, pricing is critical. However, I also encourage customers that we don't only look, there's times where you might pay, and as an example, $100 more on your freight line, but your routing is more critical because it's coming in quicker, or you're getting your cargo in quicker, as opposed to looking at pricing only, and your cargo is transshipping and you're getting your cargo much later, and as a result you end up losing a customer or losing a sale. So those are key factors that from my side that we need to look at. That's it.
Right. I was going to say, and then just because I'm in the new business space, and obviously a lot of importers and exporters come to me for their rate inquiries, and just a comment to allow time to find the solution, because I think so often we're all wanting to do things quite urgently, but because the world is a bit upside down and globally we are facing a lot of challenges, just to work with an agent that guides you and keeps you up to date, and obviously allow the time to come up with the solutions, so that you are looking at all avenues and all potential problems that could arise.
Definitely, thanks for that, Susan. An additional point is that often I hear importers saying, I'm happy with my supplier. He has done a fantastic job in the last 20 years, and that might be the case. But remember, a supplier sitting in India doesn't know what's happening here in South Africa, or the supplier from China doesn't know what's happening here in South Africa. So it's important that we look at all the options. We look at our pros and cons, and sometimes there might be a different solution in terms of how we bring in the cargo, and there might be a quicker process. There might be a different routing that we can get a better result, and I encourage everyone to look at that.
And most importantly, to identify when the cargo is needed, so that there can be that backwards logistics to get it right.
Absolutely. So thank you from my side. Any questions?
You did a good job. If there are no questions.
Thank you so much. That was quite informative and quite dynamic. Like supply chain is like a world of its own, and there's so many factors and so many moving parts in the supply chain that it's, we from our side, we sit and we only know when is our ETAs, but there's so many things that goes into that ETAs. So thank you so much for that. I'm just going to check quickly if there's any questions.
There was a question. It says, what was the acronym for the vessel tracking website that was mentioned? This is right at the beginning of your presentation. Sorry. I don't know if you want to type it into the chat.
Yes, I can. I can actually give you a full-on overview of what it is and what's the purpose of that form.
That vessel, okay, and that acronym, because I was okay. And I've just popped your email addresses. They are in the chat if anybody would like to contact Susan or Sivishnie. Aisha, I think back to you. Are there any other questions while we have these ladies here, please? You're more than welcome. But I think you did it. I love the platform where you were actually asking the questions, Susan. I think a lot of the questions were then addressed because you were posing them already. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I face the client every single day, and I know sometimes we jump ahead and we understand everything, but there's got to be a little bit more explanation sometimes.
Like frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
We have a question from Deshana. So do you find that due to the regulatory complexities in Africa, that companies are reluctant to trade there?
I think that it is, I wouldn't say reluctant to trade there. I think, Africa is it's a different ballgame. I mean, a lot of companies don't understand the regulations there. And some of the regulations, there's a lot of risk with certain things, and if you don't do it in that process or that manner. But I think it's worth you doing your homework for you to understand it. And if you do, I think then it's fine for you to venture out into Africa, because it's definitely what we're seeing. There's huge opportunities into Africa. And I think people, there's a resistance because of the unknown.
Yeah.
But if you partner with, a reputable freight forwarder, like ourselves, we understand the regulations, we understand the complexities. We've done our homework, we vetted the process, we've gone through all of that.
We've got experience.
And we've got experience. Yeah. So we've got people on the ground that can take you through that process.
I was just going to say something as well. What we got, so before I joined Rohlig, I was in a very African overborder space, and people are reluctant purely based on fear, and because you hear of people getting burnt. But also down the line, once you've vetted your supplier or your client, depending if it's imports or exports, there's a lot of loyalty. So there's not so many people out there doing the same product. So there is that loyalty, and you've just got to get the supply chain set up correctly with the support of an agent like us. And then thereafter, and most of the time travel to meet your customer or travel to meet your supplier. So there is that handshake, but thereafter it's pretty much good game, good money making space to be in.
Okay. We have another
There's question there.
Yes. From Kirsten, is there a platform to check government clearing requirements of sub-Saharan African countries?
In their platform.
We've got like the consolidators checklist, like for each country. So we could share that if you want to reach out and pop us an email. I can share that with you, but it changes all the time. So really, it's a matter of reaching out to an agent who will then reach out to that country's agent. And then get all the right information. Live info.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? You're welcome to open your mic.
Or contact us directly. It's all good.
We have a question from Percy. Hi, Percy.
Thanks, Aisha. Just to ask the ladies, how much complexity are tariff wars introducing into this visibly already strained situation?
But about customs tariff wars.
Yes, import and
so
export.
Yeah, I think that's where we've seen the shift in supply happen. So from China to India, or importers are going out to different countries to try and alleviate on the high duties. But then obviously, you have to change suppliers, maybe change what's the right term? The products, the decency of the product. What's the right term? Gone blank. Yeah. You gonna jump in there?
Yeah. So I don't get the question though.
Has the tariff wars affected global trade as well? Percy, am I understanding correctly?
Yes, just an understanding on the complexity,
Yes,
because from the presentation you shared, the system is already strained, and I'm just thinking, what are the tariff wars? Because you wake up on CNN, Trump is threatening to impose tariffs against A and B and all of that. How much complexity is that adding to the whole mix?
It has a huge impact. I mean, in terms of the tariffs that Trump has imposed on certain countries, like the for instance, China, India. So, I mean, that would mean, the supply would increase the product costs, or you would see freight costs going up. So definitely it does have an impact depending on which country you're importing from.
We've seen in the steel industry in particular.
Yes.
So the steel importers import in huge, massive volume as well, and then they're going to place the order, but we only clear when the cargo arrives here. And in that space that the cargo is on the water, there could be a tariff change. So you've got to cost it at one particular tariff, and now it lands, and you've got to clear it a different one. So yes, it's a huge impact, and it's an important step to stay close to.
Yeah. I mean, and just to add to that, Percy, the tariff wars is just one aspect. I mean, every time Trump does something in the Middle East, that's causing, crude oil, the prices of crude oil to go up. So that is a huge impact on the rest of the world, and in terms of our everyday costs.
I mean, that must put pressure on the cosmetic industry from a margin perspective, that you're having to cost it higher to make sure you're covered when you sell.
Yeah, I think it's become a bit of a minefield because, as you say, it's like you've got to add the insurance on, and then you look at it and there's another cost associated. And I think, like shame, the poor manufacturers, never mind the suppliers. You're working on one price, and the next time you look, it's changed, and the exchange rate has changed. So, sure, it is a big minefield. Never mind what's happening in the rest of the world, trying to get down to the bottom of Africa to bring us our stocks.
And I think it's particularly important, like when importers, the more you get to ship, then you can start to see the trend over time. But when you're constantly shopping for absolute best price and you're not seeing that consistency, or that you're not monitoring it with one group of people, then I think your costs would be all over the place.
I wonder if there even is a trend anymore, though, because as you say, it's like you put your television on and there is just such chaos out there at the moment.
And you don't want to add too much in case, because then you price yourself out.
Exactly.
So it's a tough game, but we're here to hold your hand if you need help.
No, we appreciate it muchly. Thank you. I think, I mean, you don't know if how to see this on a Friday morning, whether it should be positive or negative, but I think you've covered all the aspects. Thank you, ladies. Aisha, if I can just maybe pass back to you to close. Thank you.
I think there's no further questions, but thank you so much for your time and taking your time out to present to us and actually go into depth of all of the factors. It was quite just quite an eye opener. We know it, but we sometimes want to look past it. Especially, I think everybody, what is good to know is that, not good to know, but it's important to understand from our side as being also suppliers and customers, is that we have to move from the just-in-time model, and that's a big mind shift, a change in mind shift for everybody. So thank you so much, and it was really great to have you today there in our COSCEM committee. Not COSCEM, but for the COSCEM members. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Aisha. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a lovely weekend. Thanks, Aisha. Thanks, Susan.
Bye.
Thank you, Sivishnie.
Bye.
And thank you for everybody for joining. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.